God Conversations with Tania Harris.
I think it was Mother Teresa. Someone asked her, when does God speak to you? And she said, whenever he wants.
How could I know if God was speaking to me? How could I know that that was actually just me thinking about, I just had some bad pizza?
I just thought it was normal to dream and have experiences.
And she said to me, I actually have a relationship with Jesus and he talks to me. And it just blew my mind.
And then hearing the Lord speak again very clearly and just say, this is where I've called you to love and serve.
Jesus said we'd recognize his voice. It was never meant to be a one-way conversation.
What if the most powerful ministry you could offer someone isn't a sermon, a strategy, or even a solution, but just your presence? We live in a world that rushes to fix people, to explain, advise, give answers, but we often overlook that the quiet, sacred work of simply being with people might be the most effective way to support them in their pain. See, time and time again, it's in hospital rooms and juvenile detention centres, in hospice lounges, and in late-night conversations that the Holy Spirit seems to speak most clearly. What if God is already at work in the lives of people around us long before we say a word? And what if our role isn't to bring God into a room, but to recognise that God is already at work? Hi, and welcome to the God Conversations podcast today. I'm Tania Harris, and I'm a pastor, a practical theologian, author, and the founding director of God Conversations, a ministry that equips you to recognise and respond to God's voice. Welcome to the show today. We are talking with a chaplain all the way from California in the US. His name is Matt Sanders, and he has been a chaplain, a hospital chaplain, a former juvenile detention chaplain, and the author of a couple books, one called The Ministry of Presence, the other, Let God Love You. We haven't had a chaplain on before, but I read his book and I know that he has some real gold to share with you. He has had over 40 years in ministry, including 2 decades in hospital chaplaincy. He has spent his life accompanying people through some of their most sacred and some of their most shattering moments. I know this conversation is really going to move you and also give you some wisdom and some tips for just how to be with people and how to look out for the Holy Spirit when you are listening to people and supporting them, whatever they are going through. So let's do this. So great to have you, Chaplain Matt, on the God Conversations podcast. Welcome.
It's my privilege. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, as we were just chatting about, Matt, I met you through the pages of a book, The Ministry of Presence. My sister-in-law, who's a chaplain, gave me this book after we were talking about how the Spirit speaks to people beyond the church, and I just loved it. I thought, what an interesting journey that you've had, and so many beautiful experiences with people in hospitals and juvenile centres. And I thought we need to get Matt on the podcast. So great to have you.
Wow. Well, it was such a surprise to me. I was delighted to hear, you put these books out here. You don't know where they might go. I was delighted to hear that it connected with someone. So it's a real privilege.
Well, many of our audience are not chaplains, Matt, and probably know very little about chaplaincy. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of context, maybe tell us a little bit about your story, how you got to be doing what you are doing now, so that we can understand who you are.
Well, I was born and raised in the San Francisco Greater Bay Area, town called Richmond, but near San Francisco. And I was raised by a very devout Catholic mom, and I will say a humanist dad. I put it that way, kind of a humanist, And I had a bunch of brothers and sisters. I come from a family of 9 kids, and so it was a lot of fun. So the Catholic upbringing was a big part of sort of the cultural piece of my life, but not too much really connecting at the deeper level, not yet. And then when I was still in grammar school, we moved up to the Sacramento area where I still reside here, Sacramento region, California. And it was actually when my grandmother was in her older years, her eyesight started to go bad. And so the grandkids had to bring her to church. And she went to a little Disciples of Christ church. It's a little Protestant church. And it was in that church that I actually made a profession of faith in this little Disciples of Christ church. And it was quite life-changing, but I felt called back to my roots, got involved with the Catholic community again. After some years there, then I became the youth minister, actually at the parish where I grew up in and was involved. So I worked in youth ministry for a long, long time. And part of that time, I was in the chaplain at juvenile hall. We have a local, county juvenile hall. And I got asked to be a part to take over that role when the chaplain was leaving. And so that's how I got into chaplaincy. Was a Franciscan brother, actually, Brother Mark, one of my big heroes, that he thought it would be a good fit for me. And I said, Mark, I'm not at all interested in that. I wouldn't be good. The idea scares me. But it turns out it was a pretty good fit. And so I did that work for a good 20 years altogether. And then after that, I moved into hospital chaplaincy. So I've been in hospital chaplaincy now for 20 years at a local community hospital here and just down the street from my house, actually. And so that's my work history, ministry history. With my master's was in spirituality, Christian spirituality was the focus of my master's.
I haven't had any involvement with chaplaincy at all, but I imagine it takes you at the forefront of people's lives when they're often in pain, when it's really stressful, and you're the one that comes alongside.
You got it. It is an intense work. It's a real massive privilege, really, to be with folks during such times of crisis and profound meaning. And I've done a bit of hospice work as well, where you're going into people's homes who are at end of life. And we're working with folks at some of the most serious times of their lives, where not only are really painful, bad things even are happening, but also a lot of grace, really. And there's a lot of good things that are present, even amidst, such sometimes shattering experiences.
That's what I really gathered from your book, Matt. I was so struck by the stories and the testimonies of people at the coalface that you had come alongside. And God's really been talking to me about how the Holy Spirit works beyond the church in people's lives and how to attune to that. So that's where your book really highlighted that for me.
The Almighty is present to us all. I like to say from the moment of conception, and his love and presence never, ever ends. That's right. He's with us all.
But what about you personally, Matt? We are talking about God conversations in the lives of other people that you have ministered to. What about your own journey? Is there one spiritual consolation is the term that you give it, the time where the Holy Spirit's really ministered to you?
Thank you so much. I've had a few really profound ones, but there's one I would especially like to share. It ties in with a book I recently wrote called Let God Love You. And that book came out of this experience about maybe 20 years ago. I had a tough experience, a significant loss, and it was just so painful. And meant a lot to me then, but I hadn't really soaked it in until about 15 years later, when a friend of mine, who's also a chaplain, asked me about it. He was just asking about me and my, life. And he picked up on this spiritual consolation that I had years earlier. And he listened with such a profound, discipline of listening. The meaning of this experience enriched my life so profoundly 15 years later. And if I may share this little experience. So the context was it was a tough day and it was heartbreaking and oh. And so I fell asleep on the chair with a heavy heart. And then I had a dream. And in the dream, I heard a knock on the front door. And who was at the front door but my dad and one of his old friends by the name of Carl. Now, they had been long deceased. I knew, even in my dream, I knew my dad had died, for real. He had died. And so I said in this dream, go, Pop, what are you doing here? You're dead. And he just looked at me with this kind of these cold, steady eyes, typical of him. He just like this cool personality, and he just looked at me. And I said, "Can you come in?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Can I get you a drink?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, and he was typical himself, just short, kind of clipped, dialogue. I said, "Can I get you guys something to eat?" And he goes, "No, we're not going to stay that long." So we sat down at my kitchen table. Dad and his friend across from him, me on this side. And then evidently that was their role in the dream. That's all that they did in the dream. All of a sudden, my attention was drawn down the hallway to the bedroom. And so I walked down the hallway, went into my bedroom, and this is all just in a dream, but there standing at the doorway was I call him a quirky character. This guy, he actually was about my height, my build and everything. And he looked safe, but like odd, like, what? This is weird. This is weird. And then he said to me, "I have a message for you from God." And in the dream, I'm all like waiting with anticipation, and he's not saying anything else. And I said, "I'm ready." And he goes, "Oh, no, 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 no. It's too powerful. I can't just come right out and tell you this message. I need to tell it to you backwards." I'm like, "Backwards? What are you talking about?" He goes, "It's too powerful to take all at once." And so I go, "All right, tell me." And so he said this, what sounded like gibberish, and I couldn't make it out in the dream. I just couldn't figure it out. And I go, "Look, you're going to have to just tell me straightforward. I don't understand it." And he goes, "Okay, but I warned you, it's powerful." And then he said, "This is the message from God. Rest in peace, my love. Be still your heart in me." And that was the whole message. Rest in peace, my love. Be still your heart in me. And I was just I just was reflecting on that. It didn't mean much. And then the dream ended. And I woke up in my chair where I had fallen asleep. And then all of a sudden, the whole dream came back in like this, whoosh of understanding and importance.
Yeah.
And I started just like crying. I was weeping,
Yeah.
crying. I've come to believe for myself personally that was actually my dad and his friends giving me a little hello from heaven. Actually, I believe that. And that one had a message from God. My hunch is that may have been, well, that was an angel. I don't know if it was my guardian angel. I don't know. But that's just my guess. And
What impact did it have on you?
Now, that's the whole thing, that with these spiritual consolations, as I was reflecting on this, again, 15 years later, like when I was telling my friend about it and I was reliving it, I was going, "Rest in peace, my love." Like that's common in our culture. RIP means it really comes from the Latin, requiescat in pace. Requiescat in pace, rest in peace. That's what you say to someone, it's like a blessing for the dead. And I came to think of it as like the old needs to die so the new can arise. That's how I was thinking about it for myself. Like, with my loss that I was going through, the old go so the new can arise. Rest in peace. And here is this message where the Almighty was calling me this tender, like, nickname, my love. Oh my gosh, the Almighty calls me that. And so now sometimes I call God my love and my life. That's my favorite kind of nicknames for God. Rest in peace, my love. Be still your heart in me. He didn't say calm your mind or learn something new, study another system for healing, nothing like this. Be still your heart in me. Thinking, be still, that's a weird word. I don't remember ever hearing that one before, but it's like this gentle command. It's an invitation, it's poetic. And my heart. And so now I've been reflecting on that almost every day since, because of how I'm 62. I just hit 62, early retirement age. And I need that more now than probably, I don't know, ever in my life. The older I get, the more I need that very, I'll say, truth or message.
Yeah, and I imagine too, your role is such a ministry where you come alongside people where you would need to be still and you would need to be at peace in yourself. Otherwise, you cannot minister to others. Would that be true?
Yes, very well put. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So your book talks a lot about spiritual consolations. It's a term that St. Ignatius of Loyola used to describe moments where people experience spiritual joy and peace and hope. Would that be right? When God was touching people's lives?
Yes.
And that you see part of your role is helping people to understand or to strengthen what they're experiencing. Is that a good description?
And good old St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits, of course, he said, during times of spiritual desolation, you could just say depression, where you're shredded, life is really hard. During those times, he says, it can be helpful to calm your heart and your mind a bit and recall previous times of spiritual consolation, times where you felt a sense of presence of God, something very special spiritually, and so forth. And by remembering that, it can reignite like your faith and these inner gifts that can be resources during today's crisis.
Yeah, I think if we start with the understanding that the Holy Spirit is at work in people who are open, and then we can come alongside and support that, can't we? We don't have to change anyone's heart. We're not the authors of hope. God is. So how do I foster that in someone's life? And you told some of the stories, Chaplain. Matt, I wondered if you could share one or two of those because they were just so profound.
Yes, I just love stories, and I'd be delighted to. For some reason, sometimes I'll go through seasons where I'll hear a lot of stories from people, and I just love them and to share them. Maybe I'll share one I don't think I mentioned it in the book, but it was actually about a little 9-year-old boy, but I didn't mention it's my nephew, in fact. I don't think I've said that. But he had experience that was so very, very special. I took him to a Christian bookstore, and I just wanted to buy him something I think he had First Communion or something like this. And I wanted to see what he would like to get by way of celebrating that. And I showed him this little picture, this little card that had a black and white image, those pictures, black and white images. You can't tell if there's a picture there or if it's just a blob of ink. And he looked at this, and the directions is you just stare at the middle of it for about a minute, which is a long time. And then you close your eyes, and then after closing your eyes, what usually happens is you get sort of this reverse image, sort of like a negative on an old film. And it's a picture, a rendering of Christ, his face of Christ. Yeah. Well, after he stared at it and he opened his eyes, I didn't want to prompt him too much by saying what he's, quote, supposed to see. And I say, did you experience anything? Did you see anything? And he said, no, I didn't see anything. But he was very thoughtful, and he goes, but I heard something. I said, you heard something? Whoa, that blew my mind. I'd never heard anybody say that they heard something. And I said, and I didn't want to push him, but just let it come from him naturally. I said, you heard something. I wonder what you heard. And he said, and he suffered. Whoa, that was it. And he suffered. And later on the drive home, I was taking him home, I said, hey, that was interesting what you said. I was very excited when he told me this story, but I didn't want to impose my own, I don't know, meaning and all of that
Yes.
onto his just plain experience. I want to get mixed up with mine, you might say. And I said, that was interesting. Would you tell me, would you mind? I'd like to hear that again. He told me the same story, word for word. It was identical, but he said it with even more, I'll say more meaning and strength and like passion even, it's like, and I just quietly reflected on it. And then when we got home, I didn't prompt him, but he started telling the story to my brother, his dad. And he told his story, but it was very short and quick and short and sweet, very quick. And my brother, he didn't catch the import of it. I said, hey, listen to this. Could you say that again a little slower? And when he said it the third time, was with even more like depth and meaning. Now, I don't know what kind of fruit that may bear in his life. I have no idea. But I expect, my guess is that will be a spiritual consolation that he may be able to look back on, in his future, in his life. It's probably been about, I don't know, 8 years ago now that he experienced that one, maybe 10, I don't know. And these kinds of beautiful experiences with a lot of wisdom in there for him. And I felt like if I would just listen to that and affirm it and without laying a big layer of my own interpretation on it, I thought maybe that might help. And so that's one little experience that I wanted to share, that I shared in that book to help express this idea of helping another to savor their spiritual consolations.
And that's really the Spirit at work, isn't it? Moving us towards God and helping us to understand what God is like. It's beautiful. I love that. We are talking with Chaplain Matt Sanders from Southern California, who's had so much wonderful experience coming alongside people, particularly in times of need. We'll hear more in just a moment. When Jesus walked the earth, he said his people would recognize his voice and follow it. Then after he died, rose again and left the earth, he sent the Holy Spirit to continue speaking. That means when we choose to follow Jesus, we can hear the voice of the Spirit for ourselves. But just like any other relationship, learning to hear and recognize God's voice can take time. That's why at God Conversations, we've developed a whole range of resources to help you along the way. I invite you to join the journey by subscribing to regular email updates at godconversations.com. You'll also receive a complimentary devotional plan, plus notification of new podcasts, articles, and videos to help you along the way. Why don't you jump in and join the journey? Hearing the voice of God will change your life, believe me. It will set you free. It will show you what love looks like, and it will invite you to join the mission of God. You'll never be the same. Come check us out at godconversations.com. Welcome back to God Conversations. We're talking with Chaplain Matt here about what God is saying and speaking about in the lives of people he ministers to. And you found yourself in a juvenile centre as well. I remember you telling a story in your book about a young teenager, which I felt was really profound as well, Matt.
I got my start in chaplaincy in juvenile detention, and it's a massive privilege to be able to hear some of these stories and be present to kids during crisis. And this one I thought was so profound. I was talking with the kid. He was in his cell. I was outside the cell, talking through the crack in the door. This is how you talk with people who are incarcerated sometimes. And he started telling me about what got him locked up. I wouldn't ask that question. If they want to bring it up, they can. I don't need to know that. But anyway, he was just talking about it. And then he shared that during he was a gang member, which was very common, still a problem in our region, not as bad, I don't think, but it was a massive problem decades ago here. And he was saying that as a gang member, he was involved in a skirmish, for lack of a better word, for the opposite gang. And they would wear, colors, rags on their head and scarves and these kinds of things. Well, he had a rag on his head with his gang color. And he said, right in the middle of all of this fighting, yelling, chaos and everything, this 16-year-old kid, he heard a quiet voice, very peaceful, quiet voice that said, take that rag off your head. And he's like looking around. Oh, who said that? But he actually intuitively knew who said that. And he knew it was actually the voice of Jesus Christ himself. And so when he shared this with me, I go, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was so important as part of his story. I really wanted him to linger on it a little bit more and allow it to continue to feed him in this moment. And I said, would you tell me that again? You heard a voice? And so he backed up and went to the beginning of the story and told it with a little bit more detail, a little bit more reflection and specifics to sort of paint the picture. And he says, and I heard this voice that said, take that rag off your head. And he says, and I know it was Jesus, but the thing about it is he didn't have any judgment. He wasn't even at me. And I was doing the wrong thing. It's like, whoa. And he went on to say that, well, he might not have changed he did take the rag off his head that night. I don't know if he divested himself from the gangs in that moment or not, but it was a really important step. And here's this 16-year-old kid, and the Holy Spirit is powerfully active in his life.
He's hearing the voice of God. We often say the voice of God sounds like Jesus. And the beauty of that story is that there's no condemnation, there's no shame, but yet God is gently leading and convicting and correcting, but without shame. And I love that. One of the things that comes out of your work, Matt, that I've noticed is that you call this a ministry of presence, and you come alongside people and they share their stories with you. You've also been talking about the importance of listening. If some of our listeners are hearing this and they're thinking, oh, maybe God is at work in the lives of everyone around me, how do I open up that door? What does it mean to be a minister of presence?
That's a great question. I love that question. It gets right to the heart of it. I was sort of introduced to that word in a special way by a rabbi, Rami Shapiro, where he was talking to a group of chaplains. And he said, I'm not a chaplain, but as I reflect on chaplaincy, I think it comes down to presence. And so I've been thinking about that one ever since so much.
Yeah.
And presence, for me, it means having a bit of discipline to slow down my own urge to impart my own wisdom or teaching or even my own encouragement.
I'm hearing you, Matt. That was what I noticed when I read your book, Keep Your Mouth Shut, Listen. Oh, it's hard.
It is hard because these kinds of impulses come from a good place. We want to help the person. We want to see the person, the other, whole and healthy and all of this. But if I act on the urge to impart, say, my parallel story, think, oh, that reminds me of this. I want to share this with you. And this is what I learned. I don't know what's going on in another person's heart, but I know for me, when that happens for me, I kind of feel like, I think I had a little bit more wisdom inside of me that I could be exploring right now rather than processing your wisdom. And so ministry of presence for me is about that, the discipline. Well, as my late great supervisor, Timothy Little in chaplaincy, he was my trainer, primary supervisor. He'd say, show up and shut up. So course, we don't just shut up. We do say things, but listen. And it is a discipline.
It starts with the confidence that God is at work already before you get there, that we are not the
Yes.
vessel of all wisdom and consolation, that the Holy Spirit's already at work. And so the goal is, I guess, to bring that out or to highlight, strengthen, support what God is already doing. And if we are too ready to speak and impose our ideas, then we block that, don't we?
Yes. Yes. Exactly. The Holy Spirit is
Mm.
already present in the lives, I believe, of everyone. And there is good, rich stuff already happening in the other person's life, even if things are a tragic mess right now.
That's what struck me reading your book. It was like, oh my gosh, God's everywhere and doing, if you just listen. One thing was also particularly interesting from your writing, Matt, was, often we have these God conversations in church or in church settings, but a lot of yours are in hospital, jail settings. They're not necessarily with people of faith. In fact, there was one story you wrote about the 89-year-old atheist. How did that work?
Yes. Oh, my. I'll never forget that one. I can still picture where I saw this man. Yeah, he was in the ICU. And it might have been actually one of the nurses might have said, "Hey, Matt, would you go visit him? He's here for suicidal ideation." And I'm all like, "Oh, 89. Wow." So I visited him, knowing a little bit of that story, that background, but I didn't mention any of that when we met, I just introduced myself. "Hello, my name's Matt, one of the chaplains on staff here. I don't want to disturb your need for rest, but just wanted to check in a moment." And he goes, "Oh, chaplain, I have a story I think you might like." And I said, "Well, I bet you do." And then he went on to say that he was, up until I think like 2 years prior or something, he said, "I was an atheist until about 2 years ago." Whoa. Yeah, I am interested in that. I'd be happy to hear. And he went on to say that he believed that when we die, we just go back to the earth. There's no soul, no God, no heaven, no hell, none of this stuff. And he was actually cool with that. He had made peace with that notion. And he said, but his wife had died a few years earlier. And there was one day where he was sitting at home and his gardener was doing, his weekly rounds or whatever outside. And he was kind of ticked off at the gardener. Wasn't doing a good enough job. He didn't want to pay him. He was just like, feeling crabby, or whatever. And he was planning not to pay him. And then he heard a sweet little voice that said, "Don't forget the gardener." And he's like, "Oh my God." She says, that was his wife's voice. He knew without a shadow of a doubt, that was the voice of his late wife. "Don't forget to pay the gardener. Don't be so cranky." She knows him better, knew him better than anybody. And in that moment, he realized, oh, somehow we keep living. Once the body is done, somehow inner self keeps going. And I don't think he had all the language for it, but it changed his life in that way. He said he still didn't know if there was a God, or it's like I think he kind of shifted to agnostic when it came to that notion. And so here he was, this elderly gentleman in a crisis for whatever he was going through. But I felt that it was very encouraging for him to tap into that memory of that his wife was with him. Life has a meaning beyond the grave.
One of the ways you know it's God is because of that impact, isn't it? The fruit of the Spirit, hope, joy, love, peace, where that comes with the moment. It's not contrived, it's not made up, it actually acts on you and it changes you. I think as we think about how do I help other people experience these spiritual consolations, how do I help other people connect with the Holy Spirit? That's what we're looking for, isn't it? We're looking for those moments of the fruit of the Spirit in someone's life. And we can help them discern it, and we can help them understand it, and strengthen their spiritual journey, this man's journey going from atheism to the possibility, oh, there's something more. It's quite beautiful.
Yeah, that is just the thing, helping them to tap back into the wisdom and the presence of God that has been active in their lives from day one, too
This
much.
thing, it's a gift, isn't it? It really is.
Yes.
Last, I want to ask you, I was curious as well, because you write about this in your book too, spiritual consolations amongst those who are of a different faith tradition. What did that look like for you? You've obviously
Ye-
ministered to all sorts of interesting people in hospitals. It's not like you only ministered to Christian people or Catholic people. What about the consolations of other faith traditions?
Like just recently, and I don't think this violates any, privacy. I think this is okay to say. Recently, a young man came to the hospital he had to attend to some business after the death of a family member. And that the patient had already died days prior, but he had to come to the hospital. And I was one that met him and helped facilitate what he needed to do. And as he was talking, he had to drive a number of hours to get to the hospital as he lived out of the area. As he was talking, he said that when he came down the corridor, the freeway from his region to ours, he said there was a boatload of, what do you call those things? Tumbleweeds, tumbleweeds that were along the side of the road. And I said, is that common? I'm not too familiar with that. And he goes, no. He goes, we see tumbleweeds further out, but never, ever on this long stretch. And he goes, and the trippy thing is, and he went on to say that his family member, that was his nickname, Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed. And he saw all these tumbleweeds. And so he and the person he was with were just laughing at this thing. It's like, there's no way that's a coincidence,
Yeah.
I don't know that guy's, I don't know his faith tradition or whatever. Sure. But these kinds of experiences are, I would guess, are all over the place, and that phrase, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. So when he was telling me this beautiful story, I'm like, man, it's super cool. I wanted to hear a little bit more about it. And I also wanted to help him soak it in too. And I say, you mean to tell me? And I just ask him a little bit more about that to deepen. And by the end of it, we're all laughing. Like, that's fantastic. That's his nickname. It's just a real privilege, regardless of a person's beliefs, faith, tradition, whatever. It's beautiful. It's a privilege to be, to listen and to discipline oneself, to say too much sometimes. Let the other one's wisdom speak to them.
I love that, Matt. You are a true gift, I can imagine, to everyone you minister to. And we've just loved having you on the podcast today. I pray that it has encouraged our listeners to perhaps listen more actively and what God might be doing in the lives of those around them, wherever they come from or whatever their belief system. And let's just really believe that the Spirit will continue to minister and that we'll be able to be present and really encourage them in that journey towards God.
Thank you for letting me be a guest today. It's fantastic. And all my best to your listeners as well.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for listening to God Conversations with Tania Harris. Don't miss the next episode by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast app. And remember, the Holy Spirit was given so we could all hear God's voice. It was never meant to be a one-way conversation.